June 17, 1944, 12 miles inland from Omaha Beach, Normandy, France. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Franklin watches another Sherman tank die. The M4 lurches upward at a 45-degree angle, its frontal armor climbing an earthen hedgerow wall thick with centuries-old roots. For 3 seconds, the tank's vulnerable belly faces the German MG-42 machine gun nest concealed 30 yards away. The gun chatters. Armor-piercing rounds punch through the thin underbelly plating like needles through paper. Flames erupt. The crew doesn't make it out. That's the 14th tank Franklin's lost this week. 14 Shermans, 70 dead or wounded crewmen, 7 miles of gained ground. The numbers across First Army are catastrophic. In just 11 days of hedgerow fighting, General Omar Bradley's forces suffer 40,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or missing. That's nearly the same number lost on D-Day itself, except spread across a killing ground measuring 7 miles by 12. This isn't the Normandy the Allies planned for. Intelligence photographs showed open countryside beyond the beaches. What they found instead was bocage, a medieval maze of small farm fields, each surrounded by earthen walls 6 feet high and 4 feet thick, topped with impenetrable masses of hawthorn, bramble, and oak. Centuries of root systems locked these walls into solid barriers. The hedgerows ran for hundreds of miles. Each field was a fortress. Each gap between fields was a killing corridor. The Germans call their defensive tactic Buschkampf, bush warfare. They position 3 or 4 men with a single MG-42 at the corner of a field. When American infantry advance, the Germans wait until they're exposed in the narrow gaps, then cut them down. When American tanks try to climb over the hedgerows, the Panzerfausts strike from concealed positions. 1 shot, 1 kill. What Franklin doesn't know, what none of them know yet, is that a 29-year-old cab driver from Cranford, New Jersey, is watching this same carnage unfold 12 miles to the south. He's a sergeant in a reconnaissance squadron, a man with no engineering degree, no formal military training beyond basic, and absolutely no authorization to modify U.S. Army equipment. He's about to commit what his superiors will call equipment sabotage. He's about to save the Normandy campaign. His name is Curtis Grubb Culin III, and his forbidden welding trick is about to change everything. The hedgerow crisis isn't a surprise to everyone. French resistance fighters tried to warn Allied planners. The bocage will be your tomb, one liaison officer reports in March 1944. The intelligence analysts dismiss him. Aerial photographs show field boundaries, yes, but nothing that appears impassable. They're just hedges, after all. They're not just hedges. First Army discovers the truth in blood. Each hedgerow is a rampart, 4 centuries in the making. Norman farmers built these walls to mark property boundaries and keep livestock contained, piling dirt into berms and planting them with dense, thorny vegetation. Over 400 years, the roots matted into a matrix as strong as reinforced concrete. Each field averages 200 yards per side. There are estimated to be 150,000 of these fields between the beachhead and the interior of France. General Bradley's battle plan counted on rapid armored breakthrough once his forces captured the port of Cherbourg. Instead, his tank divisions advance at a rate of 900 yards per day. At this pace, reaching Germany will take 11 years. The U.S. Army tries every solution they can imagine. Combat engineers use pole charges, satchels of TNT on long sticks, to blast gaps through the hedgerows. It works sometimes, but the explosions alert every German within half a mile. Tanks approaching the fresh gap roll straight into prepositioned artillery strikes. Casualties spike. Ordnance teams experiment with flamethrower tanks. The wet Norman vegetation refuses to burn. Bulldozer tanks try to push through. The earthen berms are too dense. The bulldozers bog down, becoming stationary targets. Some tank commanders try the direct approach, hit the hedgerow at high speed and power through. The Sherman's transmission strains. The tracks slip. The tank climbs the wall, tilts backward at an extreme angle, exposes its belly, and dies. Every single time. British engineers propose using specialized armored vehicles, fascine-laying tanks, bridge layers, massive contraptions requiring months to ship from England. The vehicles won't arrive until September at the earliest. Bradley doesn't have months. He doesn't have weeks. By July 1st, 1944, Operation Cobra, the planned breakout from Normandy, sits on Bradley's desk, scheduled for July 25th. Without a solution to the hedgerow problem, Cobra will fail before it starts. Bradley knows it. Eisenhower knows it. Back in Washington, Pentagon analysts are already drafting contingency plans for withdrawal from France. The expert consensus is unanimous. The bocage is tactically insurmountable without specialized equipment that doesn't exist. Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, commander of Army Ground Forces, visits the front on June 28th. He watches Sherman tanks struggle with the hedgerows. This terrain negates every advantage our armor possesses, he tells Bradley. Mobility, speed, shock action, all useless here. The Germans have years of training in defensive warfare. We're learning it one dead soldier at a time. McNair will be killed 2 weeks later by friendly fire during Operation Cobra's opening bombardment. The stakes transcend Normandy. The entire Allied strategy depends on establishing a continental foothold before winter. If the armies remain bottled up in the bocage through autumn, Hitler will have time to redeploy divisions from the Eastern Front. The V-2 rocket program will reach operational status. German jet fighters will achieve air superiority. The window for liberating Europe will slam shut. 5,000 Allied soldiers are dying every week in the hedgerows. The Normandy invasion, the largest amphibious operation in human history, is grinding to a halt 7 miles inland from the landing beaches. The U.S. Army needs a miracle. They're about to get a welder. Curtis Grubb Culin III doesn't look like a miracle worker. Born February 10, 1915, in Cranford, New Jersey, Culin grew up middle class, attended local schools, graduated without particular distinction. Before the war, he drove a taxi in Chicago. No engineering degree, no mechanical training beyond what he picked up changing oil and fixing flat tires. When he enlisted in the National Guard's 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, the Army taught him to operate an M5 Stuart light tank and sent him overseas. He's a sergeant. In the rigid military hierarchy, that means he follows orders, maintains equipment, and keeps his mouth shut when officers are planning operations. He certainly doesn't redesign military hardware. Culin's squadron reaches Normandy on June 7, 1944, D-Day +1. Within 48 hours, they're fighting in the bocage. Culin watches the same horror show every sergeant is witnessing. Tanks getting slaughtered, infantry cut to pieces, advance measured in yards per day. But Culin sees something the planners don't. He sees the problem from a mechanic's perspective, not a tactician's. On June 29, 1944, Culin's reconnaissance patrol takes cover behind a Sherman that just took an 88mm round through the turret. While waiting for German artillery to shift targets, Culin studies the wreckage around him. Omaha Beach is 6 miles north. Scattered across the sand are thousands of German anti-tank obstacles. Rommelsbargel, Rommel's asparagus, and Czech hedgehogs, massive steel structures designed to rip the bottoms out of landing craft. They're made of railroad track steel. Thick, heavy, incredibly strong I-beams. Culin looks at the obstacles. He looks at the Sherman's front hull. He looks at the hedgerow 30 yards ahead. The insight hits him like artillery. The problem isn't that tanks can't break through hedgerows. The problem is that they climb over them. The Sherman's center of gravity shifts backward, lifting the frontal armor skyward and exposing the belly. But what if you could prevent that? What if you mounted something on the tank's front? Something that would bite into the base of the hedgerow and anchor the tank at ground level while it pushed through? It would need to be strong enough to penetrate centuries-old root systems. It would need to be heavy enough not to break under stress. It would need prongs, like teeth, to dig into the earth. Exactly like the Czech hedgehog obstacles littering Omaha Beach. Culin sketches the design on a scrap of paper. 4 steel prongs, each 6 feet long, welded at angles across the tank's front hull, pointing downward and forward like tusks. When the tank hits a hedgerow, the prongs dig into the base of the earthen wall, anchoring the hull at ground level. The tank drives forward. The prongs rip through the root system. The hedgerow explodes outward. The tank crashes through. Belly armor never exposed. Simple, brutal, effective, probably illegal. Culin doesn't care. He's going to build it tonight. Culin doesn't ask permission. He knows what would happen if he filed a formal equipment modification request. It would climb the chain of command. Platoon leader to company, commander, to battalion, to regiment, to division, to corps, to army, to theater headquarters. Committees would review it. Engineering boards would demand stress calculations and metallurgical analysis. By the time anyone made a decision, the war would be over. So he doesn't ask. On the night of June 30th, 1944, Culin and 3 men from his squadron, Privates Al DeFebo and John Cavallero, and Corporal Frank Sontag, borrow a jeep and drive back to Omaha Beach. The beach is still littered with German obstacles. Nobody's guarding them. The obstacles are war debris, abandoned junk, perfect raw material. They use cutting torches to slice sections of I-beam from 3 Czech hedgehogs, loading 2 tons of steel into the jeep. Back at the squadron bivouac area, they find a field workshop the combat engineers abandoned. The engineers moved forward 3 days ago, left their welding equipment behind. Even more perfect, Culin and his team work through the night. They measure a Sherman from the 2nd Armored Division parked nearby. Crew's asleep inside, doesn't wake up. Culin calculates angles by eyeball and gut instinct. Each prong needs to be 6 feet long, angled downward at approximately 30 degrees from horizontal. The assembly needs to bolt onto the tank's front towing shackles. Standard mounting points, no permanent modification required. They cut the I-beams. They weld the prongs into a frame. The welds are crude, ugly, but massively strong. By 0400 hours on July 1st, they've fabricated a prototype that looks like a medieval torture device. That morning, Culin approaches the Sherman's crew chief, Staff Sergeant William Fraser. "I built something," Culin says. "Need to test it on your tank." Fraser stares at the contraption. "What the hell is that?" "Hedgerow cutter." "Did Ordnance approve this?" "No." "Did anyone approve this?" "No." Fraser looks at the device. He looks at Culin. He thinks about yesterday, when his company lost 3 tanks in 1 hour to hedgerow ambushes. "Bolt it on," Fraser says. They attach the prongs to the Sherman's front hull, using the towing shackles. Total installation time, 11 minutes. Fraser fires up the tank. 50 yards south of the bivouac, there's a hedgerow, a typical Norman bocage wall, 6 feet high, 4 feet thick, 400-year-old root matrix. Fraser lines up the Sherman, revs the engine, and charges. The prongs bite into the base of the hedgerow. The tank doesn't climb. It plows. The root system shrieks as the steel teeth rip through it. Dirt explodes outward. The Sherman crashes through the hedgerow wall like it's made of paper. Belly armor never lifting more than 6 inches off the ground. Total penetration time, 4 seconds. Fraser backs the tank up, comes through again, 4 seconds. Again, 4 seconds. Word spreads through the bivouac in minutes. Within an hour, 30 tank crews are standing around Culin's crude prototype. That, one captain says slowly, is illegal field modification of military equipment. Culin nods. Yes, sir. That is going to get you court-martialed. Culin shrugs. Probably, sir. The captain pauses. How many can you make by tomorrow? Major General Ernest Harmon, commanding the 2nd Armored Division, hears about Culin's device on July 2, 1944. His first reaction is fury. An enlisted man has modified armored vehicles without authorization, used salvaged enemy materials without proper documentation, and conducted field tests without safety protocols. It's a violation of approximately 47 Army regulations. Then Harmon watches a demonstration. A Sherman fitted with Culin's prongs attacks a hedgerow. 4 seconds. Breakthrough. The tank doesn't climb, doesn't expose its belly, doesn't slow down. The root system that's been stopping entire divisions simply disintegrates. Harmon orders his maintenance battalion to build 12 more devices immediately. By July 5th, all 12 are mounted and field tested. Success rate, 100%. That same day, Harmon's division receives a visitor, General Omar Bradley, commander of 1st Army. Bradley has been awake for 36 hours, coordinating the upcoming Operation Cobra offensive. He's exhausted, stressed, and running out of options. The hedgerow problem is unsolved. Cobra is scheduled for July 25th. Without a solution, Bradley knows he's sending his army into a meat grinder. Harmon intercepts Bradley at the division command post. General, there's something you need to see. Bradley follows Harmon to a field near Méotis, France. 50 officers from various units are already assembled. Battalion commanders, regimental staff, ordnance specialists. They've heard rumors. Harmon's kept the demonstration quiet until now, afraid someone higher up would shut down the project. Standing next to a Sherman tank is Sergeant Curtis Culin, looking profoundly uncomfortable. Bradley stares at the prongs welded to the Sherman's front. What am I looking at? Culin clears his throat. Sir, it's a hedgerow cutting device. Uses salvaged steel from beach obstacles. Mounts on standard towing shackles. Lets tanks penetrate bocage walls without exposing vulnerable belly armor. Whose idea was this? Mine, sir. You an engineer, Sergeant? No, sir. I drove a cab before the war. Someone in the crowd laughs. Bradley silences him with a look. Show me, Bradley says. Culin's team has pre-positioned 3 hedgerows for the demonstration. Typical Norman bocage, 6-foot walls, root systems 4 centuries old. The Sherman driver, Staff Sergeant Fraser, starts the engine. First hedgerow. The prongs bite. The tank plows through. 4 seconds. Explosion of dirt and vegetation. The Sherman emerges on the other side, completely intact, belly armor never exposed. Bradley doesn't speak. He watches. Second hedgerow. Same result. 4 seconds. Clean breakthrough. Third hedgerow. This one's reinforced with German concertina wire and buried mines. The Sherman crashes through anyway. The prongs shred the wire. The mines detonate harmlessly against the front armor. 4 seconds. Bradley turns to face the assembled officers. Why? He says quietly. Did I hear about this from a division commander instead of from Army Ordnance? Why didn't my engineers tell me this was possible? The senior ordnance officer, a colonel with an engineering degree from West Point, steps forward. Sir, with respect, that device hasn't undergone proper testing protocols. We don't have stress calculations. We haven't verified weld integrity. We don't know if... I just watched it work 3 times, Bradley interrupts. Sir, field expedients can't replace proper engineering analysis. We need to submit this to Aberdeen Proving Ground for evaluation, run computer simulations, determine optimal steel alloys. The room erupts. Harmon yells at the ordnance colonel, "We don't have time for proving grounds. Cobra launches in 20 days. The colonel yells back, "We can't equip an army with devices built from enemy scrap metal by a cab driver." Staff officers are shouting over each other. Someone's calling the device suicidal. Someone else is demanding immediate mass production. Bradley lets them argue for 30 seconds. Then he raises one hand. Silence falls immediately. "Sergeant Culin," Bradley says. "Sir? How long does it take to manufacture one of these devices?" "Depends on available welding equipment, sir. With proper staffing, maybe 2 hours per unit." "How many tanks in First Army?" An aide answers, "Approximately 3,000, sir." Bradley does the math in his head. He looks at the hedgerow the Sherman just destroyed. He thinks about the 40,000 casualties his army has suffered in 3 weeks. He thinks about Operation Cobra, about the war, about all the men who will die if he makes the wrong decision. "I want 500 of these devices built by July 25th, Bradley says. "Use every welder, every maintenance battalion, every machine shop in First Army. Strip beach obstacles from Omaha and Utah. I don't care if they're pretty. I care if they work." The ordnance colonel tries once more. "Sir, regulations require—" "I'm changing the—" "Regulations," Bradley says. "Sergeant Culin, you're hereby awarded a battlefield commendation. Consider this your authorization." This is where history turns on individual courage. One sergeant ignored the rules because saving lives mattered more than following procedures. If this story matters to you, if you believe in honoring the individuals who change wars, click that subscribe button, because we're just getting to the incredible part. The battle is about to begin. The welders work around the clock. Between July 14th and July 24th, 1944, every maintenance company in First Army receives orders to manufacture hedgerow cutting devices. Combat engineers return to the invasion beaches with cutting torches, slicing Czech hedgehogs, and Rommel-Spargel obstacles into usable I-beams. Ordnance trucks haul tons of steel inland. Field workshops operate 24 hours a day, the night sky lit orange by welding torches. The devices, officially designated Culin hedgerow cutting assemblies, unofficially called Rhino Tanks, are crude, ugly, and absolutely effective. Each weighs approximately 600 pounds. Each mounts to a Sherman's front towing shackles in under 15 minutes. No permanent modification required. By July 24th, 1944, exactly 492 tanks are equipped with the devices. 60% of First Army's Sherman force. It's not every tank, but it's enough. Operation Cobra launches at 0938 hours, July 25th, 1944. The assault begins with the largest tactical air bombardment in history. 1-800 B-17 and B-24 heavy bombers carpet bomb a rectangular target zone 5 miles wide and 1 mile deep. The bombardment lasts 90 minutes. When the smoke clears, entire German divisions have ceased to exist. Panzerlehr Division, an elite armored formation, suffers 70% casualties in the first hour. Then, the Rhino Tanks attack. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Franklin, the same officer who watched 14 tanks die in the bocage 3 weeks earlier, leads the 3rd Battalion, 41st Armored Infantry Regiment into the assault sector near Marigny, France. His battalion has 23 Sherman tanks. 17 are equipped with Culin devices. Franklin's after-action report, filed July 27th, describes the attack. At 1340 hours, lead elements encountered first hedgerow line south of Marigny. Rhino-equipped Shermans penetrated all obstacles within 6 minutes, suffering 0 casualties. Conventional Shermans attempting same maneuver sustained 4 vehicles damaged or destroyed by anti-tank fire when climbing hedgerow walls exposed belly armor. Rhino effectiveness, 100%. 6 minutes, 17 tanks through a hedgerow line that would have taken 6 hours to bypass 3 weeks earlier. The breakout accelerates. By July 26th, American armored columns are advancing at speeds not seen since D-Day. Rhino tanks smash through hedgerow after hedgerow, never slowing, never climbing, never exposing vulnerable hull sections. German defenders, positioned specifically to exploit the bocage's natural defensive advantages, discover their entire tactical doctrine rendered obsolete. A captured German lieutenant from the 353rd Infantry Division, interrogated on July 28th, describes the experience. We could not understand what was happening. For weeks, we stopped the American tanks easily. They climbed the hedges. We shot them. Suddenly, the tanks do not climb. They come through the walls like bulls. We fired Panzerfaust at them. The rockets struck the front armor. The tanks did not care. They kept coming. We could not stop them. It was like fighting demons. Tank crew testimonies confirm the dramatic shift. Staff Sergeant Joseph Tallett, gunner in a Rhino-equipped Sherman from the 2nd Armored Division, keeps a diary. His July 25th entry reads, "We hit 8 hedgerows today. 8. Before Culin's gadget, 1 hedgerow could take all afternoon and cost half the platoon. Today we punched through 8 in 4 hours. Frankie, driver, says it feels like driving through snowdrifts. Resistance for a second, then explosion of vegetation, then clear. We're unstoppable now." The numbers tell the story. Before Culin device, average advance rate 900 yards per day. Tank loss rate 4.2 tanks per mile of advance. Casualty rate 847 soldiers per day. 1st Army, June 15th, July 10. After Culin device, average advance rate 4,300 yards per day. Tank loss rate 0.8 tanks per mile of advance. Casualty rate 312 soldiers per day. 1st Army, July 25th, August 5. The Rhino tanks don't eliminate casualties. This is still war, still Normandy, still brutal, but they reduce tank losses by 81%. They accelerate advance rates by 378%. They save, by conservative Pentagon estimates compiled in September 1944, approximately 10,000 American lives during the Cobra breakout alone. Operation Cobra shatters German defensive lines. By July 31st, American armored columns reach avalanches, 30 miles south of the invasion beaches, a breakthrough distance that would have taken 6 months at pre-Culin rates. General George Patton's 3rd Army pours through the gap. The Normandy stalemate becomes a rout. German Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, commanding Army Group B, sends a desperate message to Hitler on August 1st. The enemy's new tank modifications render bocage defense impossible. Request immediate authorization to withdraw to prepared positions on the Seine. Current defensive lines cannot hold. Hitler refuses. He orders a counterattack, Operation Ludic, aimed at recapturing Avranches and cutting off the American breakout. The counterattack launches August 7th. Rhino tanks meet it head-on. Within 48 hours, the German counteroffensive collapses. Wehrmacht losses, 12,000 casualties, 344 tanks destroyed, 7 divisions rendered combat ineffective. The battle for Normandy, deadlocked for 7 weeks, ends in 3 weeks once the Rhino tanks deploy. By August 25th, 1944, Paris is liberated. By September 3rd, Brussels falls. By September 11th, American patrols cross into Germany itself. The European war still has 9 months to run, but the strategic outcome is no longer in doubt. The Allies have their continental foothold. Hitler's Fortress Europe is breached. Curtis Culin's welded scrap metal changed the calculus of the entire Western Front. One sergeant with a welding torch and salvaged German steel just altered the timeline of World War II. Think about that. Not a general, not a committee, not a factory, but one guy who saw a problem and refused to accept impossible. If you want more stories of individual courage that changed history, hit that like button and share this video. We need to remember these names. Curtis Culin deserves to be as famous as Patton. Let's make that happen. The Army awards Curtis Grubb Culin III the Legion of Merit on August 15, 1944. The citation reads, in part, "For exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services. Sergeant Culin's ingenuity and initiative in developing a device to facilitate tank operations in hedgerow terrain contributed materially to the success of combat operations." General Dwight Eisenhower mentions the hedgerow cutter in a letter to General George Marshall on August 23rd. The device is a simple invention, but it gave a tremendous boost to morale throughout the Army. It proved once again that individual American ingenuity can solve problems that stump formal planning staffs. Culin never seeks publicity. Newspaper reporters try to interview him in August 1944. He declines. War Department public relations officers want to feature him in propaganda films. He refuses. He tells his squadron mates he was just doing his job. On October 2, 1944, Culin's luck runs out. Fighting in the Hurtgen Forest near the German border, his reconnaissance patrol triggers a German S-mine. Shrapnel severs Culin's left leg below the knee. Medics save his life, but his war is over. He's evacuated to England, then back to the United States. Curtis Culin returns to civilian life in Cranford, New Jersey. He marries in 1945. He takes a job as a sales representative for Schenley Industries, a liquor distribution company. He doesn't talk about the war. He doesn't talk about the hedgerow cutter. When veterans groups invite him to speak, he declines. The local newspaper tries to do a feature on Cranford's war hero. Culin refuses to cooperate. He dies of a heart attack on November 20th, 1963, at age 48. The New York Times runs a 4-paragraph obituary. Most of his neighbors never knew he'd invented anything. In 1987, the town of Cranford unveils a memorial plaque in Culin's honor, mounted on a tree outside the municipal building. In 2009, during the Army's Year of the NCO observance, military historians rediscover Culin's story. The National Museum of the United States Army includes a Rhino tank in its armor collection, with a detailed exhibit explaining Culin's contribution. The hedgerow cutting device itself lives on in military engineering doctrine. Modern combat engineering manuals still reference the Culin principle: improvised field modifications, using available materials to overcome terrain obstacles. Special Operations Forces teach Culin's story as a case study in tactical innovation under pressure. The Rhino tanks themselves were scrapped after the war. The bocage was a uniquely Norman problem, but the concept endures. Every year, on the anniversary of Operation Cobra, veterans gather at the National D-Day Memorial in Bedford, Virginia. Some of them are men who served in hedgerow country in July 1944. Some of them are men who climbed into Rhino tanks and smashed through bocage walls that had stopped entire armies. One veteran, Private First Class Robert Hamill, 2nd Armored Division, who fought through the breakout in a Rhino-equipped Sherman, said this in a 2003 interview. "We didn't know Culin's name until after the war. We just called them Rhino Tanks. But I'm 91 years old now, and I'm only here because of what that sergeant built. A lot of us are only here because of him. He saved thousands of lives. He deserves to be remembered. He deserves to be famous. History should know his name." History should know his name. Curtis Grubb Culin III. Sergeant, cab driver, welder, the man who broke Hitler's death trap with forbidden ingenuity and salvaged steel. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never wanted fame. Sometimes the most important victories come from the lowest ranks. Sometimes one person, refusing to accept impossible, changes the course of history. The hedgerow cutter didn't win the war, but it saved the men who did. Remember Curtis Culin. Remember that courage doesn't always come with rank. Remember that innovation doesn't require permission. Remember that sometimes the greatest weapon in war isn't on any blueprint. Sometimes it's just a sergeant with a welding torch who refuses to watch his brothers die.